On the line, we have Congressman Rob Wittman from the 1st District of Virginia. He's a Republican, and he's right in the middle of the belly of the beast in there, trying to figure out how to avoid the fiscal cliff, what compromises to make with President Obama, and what we're going to do if we go over the cliff, sequestration kicks in, and the Department of Defense budget is cut by billions and billions of dollars. Congressman Whitman, great to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, John. It's great to be with you.
Let's get right to the fiscal cliff negotiations. The Speaker now, Speaker John Boehner, in private negotiations, if you will, with the president. It's got some conservatives in the Republican caucus on the Hill wringing their hands, upset over what's happening. How do you see this playing out now?
Well, we're anxiously awaiting whatever might come out of this. Obviously, the Republicans have put forward their plan, and the idea in a negotiation is for there to be some movement. So I would hope that the president would move instead of saying that he will not compromise. But that being said, there's not a whole lot that we can do other than to let the Speaker know where we stand on issues, what all of us have run on, and for him to take that before the president. So, none of us want to go over the fiscal cliff. I think taxes being raised on everybody or those tax rates expiring is not a good thing, as well as the sequestration, those defense cuts. But again, if we don't make sure that we come out of this reducing spending in a meaningful way and addressing the autopilot spending programs, that is Medicare and Social Security, then I don't think that we will have done our job. So we need to make sure that those are the principles that we stand by. And I tell folks that, we can compromise without compromising our principles, and I think that's critical going forward. And the one good thing I think out of this is that recently, at least in the past couple of days, is that the conversations have been between the president and the speaker, and not out there through the public airwaves, which is a good thing. I think that's where the nuts and bolts of these things get worked out. So we're awaiting word from the speaker about his conversations and where we're going and where we ultimately end up. But I think I don't know if you'll know anybody on the Hill or will hear anything from anybody on the Hill saying that they really want to go over the cliff. There have been a few people that said that they would be all right with it, but I think at the end of the day, they know in their heart of hearts that's not the place for this nation to be. And then to try to put things back together after that happens is just almost unachievable, I think, with all the signals that it sends to people, and then the changes that they have to make. So I'm hopeful that we get a deal done. And again, we have to stand by our principles and do all that we can to make sure that we uphold those principles.
Congressman Whitman, would you be able to live with an increase in the marginal tax rate for those earning over $250,000 as the president has called for ad nauseum, if along with that we have real definitive cuts in spending that are now and not put off to some other time?
Well, I think the proposal on the cuts has to come first. I want to see that. I would prefer to address the revenue side with closing loopholes and making the tax code a more efficient tax code that encourages savings, investment, and economic growth. I think that's the way we really get ourselves out of this. I'm still not convinced that changing tax rates are the way to do it, but I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to listen and to see what cuts would be put in place in exchange for a change in the rates on the top earners, on those individuals making over $200,000 or for families making over $250,000. And remember today that much of that income is in the hands of small businesses. So it's going to, I'm going to be looking very carefully at that if there's a proposal on the table that includes increasing rates. I want to know exactly what it includes as far as reducing spending. But I'm all ears. I'm not saying no to anything at this particular point. I want to see what's going to come to us from these negotiations.
If there are some reports, Representative in the House, from conservatives that if a deal is made indeed by Speaker Boehner that doesn't include some of the things that you just talked about, that there could be a conservative challenge to his speakership. Is that just idle talk, or could that be a reality?
I haven't heard any of those things. I think everybody there is focused on finding a way to resolve this issue, to keep us from going over the fiscal cliff, and to make sure that we're doing the right thing in the long term, and that is significant, permanent spending cuts to reduce this deficit and reduce our debt. So I don't think anybody's focus is on the reelection of the Speaker right now. I think the focus is on finding a way for us to navigate this to make sure we're doing the best for this country in the long term.
Steve Ray, John's editorial director. I have a direct question for you, sir. Good morning again.
Good morning.
Congressman, were you surprised that some members were informed by Speaker Boehner that their committee assignments were being withdrawn, perhaps because they didn't toe the party line on the message here on the fiscal cliff?
Well, I know the Speaker has some tough decisions to make about committee assignments. There's an awful lot of competition for those committee assignments, and I know, he looks at a number of things as to how he does that. I know the folks that didn't get reappointed have asked for the decision-making criteria, so I think he'll probably communicate to them as to how he made those decisions. And again, he is one of a number on a steering committee that make those decisions. He has obviously a weighted vote has more influence in that steering committee. But I know those members want to understand how the decisions were made about that. And, I think the folks on the steering committee have said that they considered a number of things, and I'm sure the Speaker will have conversations with those individual members. And I know that they are concerned, and some of them are upset about, not being reappointed to the committees that they have served on. But I've never been approached by anybody in leadership, whether it's the Speaker, the Majority Leader, or the Majority Whip, and saying, this is the way you need to vote.
Okay, Representative, if we can, why don't we talk about the Egyptian situation right now? The State Department and the Obama administration has been eerily silent. The unfolding events in Egypt where President Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood is attempting to usurp virtually dictatorial powers. In the meantime, we continue to fund the Egyptian military. Do you think the continual funding of the Egyptian military in face of what's happening really makes any sense now?
Well, I have deep concerns about many of the actions that are happening there in the Middle East, and now especially with Egypt, with this change of power going from Mubarak now to President Morsi. The idea was to have a more open government, and it looks like President Morsi is going back to the dictatorship realm of Hosni Mubarak. That's deeply concerning to me. I think it's one of those things where the United States needs to ask some very probing questions of President Morsi about where the country is going. If we're going to continue to support Egypt, we need to understand exactly how they are going to structure and to run their government. In fact, when the last continuing resolution came before the Congress, there were dollars in there to send to both Libya and Egypt, and these were right after the al-Qaeda members murdered 4 Americans in Libya, and when our embassy was sieged there in Cairo. And I had some deep concerns about that. In fact, for that and for a variety of other reasons, voted against the CR because I thought it was time for us to take a step back and to really evaluate sending money to those countries and what those countries are doing, and then what the United States expects them to do if we're going to give them money. And I think that's one of those issues that we need to look across the board, and that is looking at how foreign aid is used, where we send it, and what's the result of that foreign aid. I think this is another situation where there in Egypt with the developments there, we ought to be asking some very, very serious questions and asking, is it right for us to send money there to a dictatorship that we were in support of previously with Hosni Mubarak, with having Hosni Mubarak removed? Are we going to continue to support the same type of government there? Those are significant questions, and I think they cut right to the heart of the dollars that we send to Egypt and whether we send them there or not.
We're with 1st District Congressman of Virginia, Rob Wittman. He's a Republican. Congressman Wittman, on the Benghazi situation, it's been virtually now 90 days since the incident. We still don't have definitive answers over what exactly went down, when and why. What's the holdup?
Well, John, as you know, the process as it stands now is somewhat fragmented, and that is there are a number of committees that have jurisdiction over the issues surrounding the attack at Benghazi. What I'm in support of is the Speaker appointing a select committee that would provide the opportunity for the members of the various committees of jurisdiction to come together with one committee and to ask the questions and to do the investigation to determine exactly what happened there. Because right now it's very difficult. It's kind of the information gets put out on a piece by piece basis, so it's hard to put the pieces together to figure out exactly what went on there. So I think we need to have a focused effort there with a select committee to be able to do that. And I think then, and only then, we'll be able to get really to the bottom of what happened there, and then who was accountable for this. Obviously, this is something that by any measure was totally unacceptable, and there needs to be accountability there, and we need to learn what happened, why it happened, and make sure that it never happens again. And you know, we had some questioning in a top secret briefing on the House Armed Services Committee about the actions and the capability of our military in that region of the world, and we got some good information about what they were capable of doing and then what the requests were to them. But I think that's only a small piece of the information that we need to understand about how we ended up with 4 Americans being murdered by al-Qaeda elements there in Benghazi.
Congressman, would you recommend that the President withdraw the nomination of Ambassador Susan Rice to be the next Secretary of State based on the lack of confidence in the information that she imparted to Congress, as well as the fact that she and her family own close to $500,000 in stock in TransCanada, when the State Department is the one that makes all the decisions involving any pipeline that comes across a border? Do you think it's wise to have a nominee like that with so much baggage for our one of our most important cabinet-level positions?
Well, I think all of those are very pertinent questions that need to be asked if the President were to nominate her, and obviously the Senate is in the position to be able to ask those questions. I think you've heard a number of senators expressing reservations about Ambassador Rice if she were to be nominated for Secretary of State. So I'm sure that the President and others there in the administration are having conversations with folks on the Senate to determine whether or not they choose to pursue that path. But I do think that those are legitimate questions. Anybody serving in that Secretary of State position, I think, has to be able to answer those questions. And at the end of the day, the senators there charged with making that decision are going to have to feel comfortable with that. I think with all the developments here, it certainly has placed on the administration's plate consideration of these questions as they determine who to nominate for the Secretary of State.
Congressman, since you're on the House Armed Services Committee, were you satisfied with Ambassador Rice information that she imparted to Congress on this matter?
I think it was incomplete, and of course our jurisdiction just lies within the area of the military presence and the military response. But there are other questions there, I think, that came up during the top secret briefing that I can't go into detail on. But there's certainly enough questions there about the whole process and the information that was divulged to where I do believe that there's more information that needs to be forthcoming on this issue so we can understand what happened. And certainly the information from Secretary Rice and the validity of it at both at the time she provided it and then looking at it afterwards does bring up, I think, a significant number of questions.
I know you meant Ambassador Rice, not Secretary Rice.
I'm sorry.
Can't get ahead of the
Ambassador Rice.
Slip right there.
I'm thinking of Secretary Condoleezza Rice. My slip. Yes,
don't we all?
No, Ambassador Rice. Yes.
Representative Whitman, final question. Do you see the House Republican caucus taking up immigration reform in 2013?
You know, I think it's one of those issues that we have to discuss as a caucus and determine are there things that we can do to address this issue. I do think it's one of those issues that will come up. As you know, most recently we passed a bill called the STEM Act, which provided for visas for those students that want to stay here that have attained degrees in science, technology, engineering, and math, to make sure we don't force them to go back to their countries if they want to stay here in the United States and be able to apply those degrees in those areas, especially where we need those folks. We need those mathematicians, those engineers, those technicians, and those scientists here in the United States. So I think that's the first step in addressing the immigration issue. And yes, I do think that the caucus in this 113th Congress will take that up.
We want to thank Congressman Rob Wittman, Republican from the 1st District of Virginia, from joining us here on the John Frederick Show. Congressman, we appreciate your time and, as always, your candor. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much, John. Thanks, Steve. We appreciate it and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Absolutely. Happy holidays, sir.
Happy holidays to you, too.